Welcome to CineMyles, the show for cinephiles. I'm your host, Miles Hughes. I'm joined once again by Mrs. Blythe Reed.
Hello.
And we just saw Miss Sloane, which stars Jessica Chastain as a lobbyist who takes on the gun control issue. I'm going to say this right off the bat. Jessica Chastain is phenomenal in this movie.
I love her. I love her.
From the very first frame, she's in pretty much every scene, and from the very first frame, she's hooked you. She's hypnotizing. She's got such a commanding presence. She brings so much more, like, layers to the character than I was expecting. You see the trailer, and it looks like the kind of, like, this icy, sort of, like, heartless, manipulative person.
Like, ball smashing in her Louboutins and...
Yeah, exactly.
Throwing her cell phone down and, you know, taking no prisoners.
She feels like a much more well-rounded person. She has an entire inner life. She's willing to do whatever it takes to win, but she does have, like, a personality, and she does have a conscience.
She does, yeah. One of her basic tenets of being a lobbyist is to surprise people. And you know from the very beginning that she's going to surprise you, but you don't know how or when.
Right.
So it was really interesting to see that unfold. I don't know if I'm saying her name right. Is it Mbatha-Raw?
Mbatha-Raw, who
yeah.
you were telling me was on an episode of Black Mirror. Yes. And she's one of these names that have started popping up a lot. This is probably the first thing where I really, like, saw her and took note of her performance. She's excellent in this.
She is.
It's a good cast, but most of them are just kind of there in the background. Like, Mark Strong is in it, and a couple of other people who are really good, and they're fine, but they don't really, there's not a lot of character there. But Mbatha-Raw was the only other person who really, like, popped out and was really interesting. And
she's, and she's relatively new, and she really didn't just hold her own, but she was a great foil for the character of Miss Sloane, or Liz, as they call her, because I feel like they have the same goal, but they have very different approaches to achieving that goal. And I think even though they're very different, they admire what the other person has because it's what they lack.
Yes.
So that was really interesting to see that played out.
It does tackle a very relevant and prominent issue, which is gun control and the whole concept of, higher regulations, and does that equal banning? And the movie deals with it sometimes eloquently and sometimes kind of sloppily. The big scene I'm thinking about is the whole thing where there's an attempted shooting on one of the characters, and the fallout from that, and the whole thing seems a little contrived to me. Like, it felt like a very movie thing to happen, whereas otherwise it was much more, like, these could be... It felt like an episode of House of Cards or something like that, where it's all about, like, the behind-the-scenes dealings of these Washington senators and lobbyists and so forth.
Yeah, I think there were parts of the movie that felt very movie, and I think that maybe that's a sign that the other material surrounding it is really strong, because it's glaringly obvious when there's, like, a movie trope.
The worst one for me is the one where she's in the office and, like, everyone's already left and she's just kind of staring, and then she has to throw everything, throw the papers all over the room. Yeah. And then she's, like, crawling around going through the papers.
Isn't that funny? I knew exactly what scene you were talking about, because I was like, it's one of those scenes that I hate.
It
shouldn't be in movies anymore. It just should not be allowed. We've seen it too much,
Exactly. Touching on the ending, and we won't spoil what happens, except to say that there is a big twist that, in a way, is set up from the beginning, but my opinion, at least, was that it did not seem fully in keeping with Miss Sloane's character as had been set up until that point.
Yeah. I think, I don't know, I'm torn about it because it was a little bit of a magic bullet ending, but at the same time, I wonder if there were things that she said and things that she pointed out to other people that weren't maybe immediately clear that she was also talking about herself, because she was so guarded as a character.
Right. Because you don't get a ton of her backstory. And
you don't get any of it, really.
And I kind of like that. It's less about that she feels passionate about gun issues because she's been a victim of it or has this history of it that we're told. It's much more of a practical, she just has that opinion because she has that opinion. The movie doesn't spend a lot of time on how she became the way she is. They hint at it, and there are little suggestions of what it could be, but we never get a concrete answer one way or the other.
Yeah.
And the ending, it's a little over dramatic, I would say. Like, specifically, I'm thinking when she sits down and she starts to give her big monologue, and that felt like a very, like, she's repeating a lot of the same things that she says at the beginning of the movie. Like, they really set it up in a very kind of obvious way. Like, this is the moment where I sit down and tell you my big twist thing. There's a couple of other things she does throughout the movie to sort of get the upper hand on her opponent, and they're these really clever, like, sort of like, you know, catching people off guard while they're in public or talking to their supporters, or, you know, there's even a weird bit where there's a giant, like, balloon rat that chases a senator around or something, and that sways his vote. There's something encouraging about having this crusader-like character fight for this issue, not for an emotional reason, but for a simple, like, moral, ethical, logistical reason.
And to really take a beating and take on an industry that is, you know, impossible to take on. You know, it was definitely like a modern day David and Goliath type of story. I wonder if it's a little bit preaching to the choir, because anybody who is against gun control, are they going to go see the movie? Because it's clear that's what it's about from the trailer.
Oh, no, absolutely. I think you're absolutely right. I mean, it's like Bill Maher's Religulous. Like, it makes some good points, but literally nobody who disagrees is going to go see it. So
exactly. It's like, oh, I've had that thought too, but, you know,
it's much more validation for what you already believe than something that's going to convince anyone of anything.
Yeah.
And I think that's also kind of a disappointment for me. Is that the film sets itself up to be all about this gun control issue, and for it to ultimately land on being more of a character piece about her, it's nice and all, but that wasn't the part that I was really interested in. Would you recommend the film?
I would absolutely recommend the film. Especially recommend the film to anybody who maybe would be deterred by the subject matter, just because it would be something different.
For my part, I would recommend it, definitely. I know I've maybe come across a little harsh on it, but overall I was very engaged. I would say, like, it's worth seeing for Jessica Chastain's performance alone. Thank you for watching CineMyles. Be sure to like, share, comment, subscribe, do all those fun things. Thank you for joining me, Blythe.
Of course. Thank you for having me again. I love it.
My pleasure. And we'll see you all on the flip side. Have a good night.
Bye.